Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're looking into the murder of Molly Tibbitz.
Oh, this one is definitely a tough one, but very interesting.
Yeah, she was only 20 years old, a college student, killed back in 2018.
And it really grabbed national attention.
Absolutely. We're using an episode of Anatomy of Murder as our source material for this one. Have you heard of that podcast?
Yeah, I've listened to a few episodes. It's good. They go pretty deep.
They do. And that's kind of our mission today, too, right? To take a deep dive into the details and really try to understand what happened. I think a lot of people remember hearing about Molly Tibbitz, but the case itself is pretty complex.
Yeah, there are a lot of twists and turns, that's for sure.
Definitely. And I think what makes it so fascinating and also so disturbing is this whole idea of everyday routines and technology colliding in a small town. Like, on the surface, it seems so simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you peel back the layers, and it gets really complicated.
Yeah, and it has these big consequences, too. Not just for Molly and her family, obviously, but for the whole community.
Okay, so to really get into this, we need to set the scene. We're in Brooklyn, Iowa. Population, tiny, like 1,500 people.
Small town America.
Exactly. Picture cornfields stretching as far as you can see. That classic image, right? Life moving at a slower pace.
And that's part of what makes this case so unsettling, I think. This contrast between that peaceful image and then this brutal act of violence.
Absolutely. It just shatters that image of a safe, tight-knit community. Okay, so let's talk about Molly. She was home for the summer from college, working at a daycare center. Everyone describes her as this bright, bubbly personality, someone who'd wave and smile at everyone during her evening runs.
And those runs were a regular thing, part of her routine.
Right, she was actually training for a half marathon, so it wasn't just a casual jog now and then.
And that's why her disappearance was so alarming, because it was so out of character.
So walk us through those first few days of the investigation. What was it like for a small town like Brooklyn to be dealing with something like this?
It was July 18th when Molly went out for her run, and that was the last anyone saw her.
And no one thought anything of it at first, I'm guessing.
Right. It wasn't until the next morning that things started to seem off. Her boyfriend, Dalton, texted her, but there was no response.
Okay, so at this point, it's still too early to panic, right? I mean, people miss texts all the time.
Yeah, but when she didn't show up for work at the daycare, that's when the alarm bells really started going off.
I bet. So in those early stages of the investigation, what were they focused on? Were there any obvious suspects?
Well, as you might expect, the boyfriend was immediately on their radar.
Makes sense. I mean, statistically speaking.
Right. But Dalton had a solid alibi. Several coworkers confirmed it.
So that must have been a relief for him, at least.
Yeah, and they're actually a pretty serious couple. Even talking about getting engaged, it just adds another layer of tragedy to the whole thing.
It's heartbreaking. Okay, so with the boyfriend ruled out, they're basically back to square one. Where do they go from there?
They started by doing what investigators do, right? Gathering information. They cloned Molly's phone.
Hold on, can we pause there for a sec? For those of us who aren't tech wizards, can you explain what cloning a phone actually means?
Sure. Basically, it means creating an exact copy of all the data on the phone.
So like all her texts and calls and stuff.
Exactly. And emails, photos, even deleted data. It's like a digital fingerprint of the device. And it can be really helpful for investigators trying to put together a timeline.
Wow. So they weren't just looking through her recent calls, they were going deep into her digital footprint.
Yeah. And that helped them eliminate some possibilities and narrow down the timeline. But the big break actually came from a pretty unexpected place. Molly's Fitbit.
You mean that fitness tracker she was wearing?
Yep. And it revealed something really strange.
Okay, I remember hearing about this, but I never really understood how the Fitbit played into the investigation. Can you explain that?
So the data from the Fitbit showed this sudden, huge spike in Molly's speed the night she vanished.
Like she was suddenly running a lot faster.
Way faster. Like a speed that wouldn't even be possible for someone jogging.
Wait a minute. So they could tell from the Fitbit data that she'd been taken.
Pretty much. It's all about the heart rate and pace. If you're jogging, those things stay pretty consistent. But if you're suddenly forced into a car, your heart rate jumps and your pace changes drastically because of that sudden acceleration.
Wow, that's both incredible and a little bit creepy, right? This little fitness tracker became this key piece of evidence.
It's like a silent witness, almost.
So I'm guessing this completely changed the direction of the investigation.
Oh, absolutely. It confirmed that she hadn't just run off or gotten lost. She had been abducted.
And that's when things really started to heat up.
Yeah, now the question wasn't where's Molly, it was who took her.
So where did they go from there? I mean, how do you even begin to track down an abductor?
They started by going back and reviewing tons of surveillance footage, hours and hours of it, from businesses and homes along her running route, hoping to catch that moment of acceleration the Fitbit recorded.
That sounds incredibly tedious.
It was. But they caught a break. One officer, staring at this grainy footage, spotted something. A quick flash of a runner, and then this suspicious black Chevy Malibu.
Okay, so now they have a lead, a vehicle to look for.
But how do you find one specific car in a place like that?
Right. It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
You'd think so. But get this, an off-duty deputy, a bit of a car enthusiast, he's driving around town and just happens to spot the Malibu.
No way. Are you serious?
Total coincidence, but a crucial one. He recognized it from the description the investigators had put out.
Wow. What are the chances? Okay, so they find the car. Do they just arrest the guy?
Not so fast. They needed to be smart about it. So they approached the driver, a man named Christian Rivera, pretending to do routine questioning, like they're just canvassing the neighborhood for any info about Molly.
Clever. So they're trying to catch him off guard. Did he cooperate?
Surprisingly, yeah. He even agreed to a car search. But there was a problem. Rivera didn't speak much English.
Oh boy. That adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
Big time. They needed a Spanish-speaking officer, and who shows up? A rookie, still in field training.
Talk about pressure. This is a high-stakes case, and she's thrown right into the deep end. Wow, what happened next?
Well, her name was Pamela, and somehow, despite being so new to the job, she actually managed to build a rapport with Rivera. They even connected over shared experiences with family in Mexico.
But when they asked about Molly, he claimed he knew nothing.
Exactly. So they decided to show him a picture of his car, thinking maybe that would trigger something.
Did it?
It did. He admitted to recognizing the car and even to seeing Molly jogging that night. Even said he thought she was attractive.
Okay, so now he's placing himself at the scene. Things are starting to unravel for him, right?
Definitely. At first, he said he just saw her and that was it. But then he added a detail that really freaked the investigators out. He admitted to turning his car around to follow her.
Whoa. Talk about a red flag.
Yeah.
So they've got him placing himself at the scene, admitting to following her. This is getting intense.
And it gets even more complicated. They found out Rivera was undocumented, so they decided to contact Homeland Security to put the detainer on him.
That's a tough call. I can see how this case is about to get way bigger than just a missing persons investigation.
For sure. But at that point, their focus was still on getting answers from Rivera.
Right. So what happened next?
Well, they needed more than just him admitting to being in the area. They needed a confession. And here's where Pamela, that rookie officer, she really stepped up. She felt like she'd built a connection with Rivera, so she asked if she could interview him again.
Yeah, okay, this is getting good. What happened during that second interview?
Pamela tried a different approach. She started talking about hypothetical situations, relating things back to her own life.
Interesting. Kind of like a softer approach? Did it work?
Not really. Rivera was still holding back. So they tried something else. Good cop, bad cop, but with a little twist.
Oh, I've seen that in the movies. Does that actually work in real life?
Well, you'd be surprised. In this case, it did. Rivera finally broke down and confessed. But he had one condition. He'd only tell Pamela what happened.
Wow, that's incredible. What did he tell her?
He admitted to everything. Following Molly, getting into a fight with her on the road. He said he blacked out during the fight and later found her earbuds in his car and realized she was in the trunk.
Oh, God, that's awful. But at least now they knew what happened and who was responsible, so what did they do next?
Well, finding Molly's body became the top priority. Agent Trent, who was leading the investigation, knew this was a critical moment. He appealed to Rivera, urged him to tell them where they could find her, emphasized the need to give her family closure.
I can't even imagine what that conversation must have been like. So much tension, so much emotion. Did Rivera cooperate?
He did. Led them on this somber journey, driving through these muddy back roads. Finally, they stopped at this remote cornfield early in the morning.
I bet that scene was just grim.
It was raining, the corn was all wet, bugs everywhere, but they were determined to find Molly.
So they get to the cornfield. What happens next?
They searched for a while, no luck. Then Rivera points to a spot where he'd hidden her body under some corn stalks. She'd been out there for weeks, exposed to the elements. It was devastating.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. So they had their confession. They'd recovered Molly's body. It seems like the investigation had reached a major turning point.
You'd think so, right? But here's where things take another unexpected turn. And it all comes back to Pamela, the rookie officer. Remember how she was still in training? Well, in all the chaos of that first interview with Rivera, she accidentally left out a key part of the Miranda warning.
Oh, no. Didn't we talk about how important the Miranda warning is? Like, it's a fundamental legal right.
Exactly. And because of that mistake, Rivera's confession, the one Pamela worked so hard to get, it was suddenly inadmissible in court.
Oh, wow. That's a huge setback. What'd they do?
Well, they had to scramble. Remember how Agent Trent said the only thing better than one confession is two confessions?
Yeah, he said that on the drive to the cornfield, right?
Yeah,
So they were already thinking ahead.
always. Trent's a smart guy. He knew they couldn't rely on that first confession, so he told Pamela to re-Mirandize Rivera during the drive. Get him to tell the story again, but make sure everything was done by the book this time.
Said some quick thinking under pressure.
Yeah.
So, did it work? Did they get that second confession?
They did. Pamela, despite her earlier mistake, she managed to pull it off. Maybe Rivera was just tired of being questioned, but he confessed again, even added the detail that he brought them to the body as proof of his guilt.
Wow. That's intense. So they basically salvaged the situation.
Exactly. And that second confession, along with the DNA evidence and the details about Molly's injuries, all of that formed the basis of the prosecution's case.
Okay, but we know this case isn't just about the legal battle, right? There's this whole other layer to it.
You're right. The news about Rivera being undocumented, that blew the whole thing wide open. It became this huge national debate about immigration.
And that's where things get really complicated. You have this horrible tragedy, a young woman's life is cut short, and suddenly it's this political football.
Exactly. It was all over the media. Everyone had an opinion. And even President Trump got involved, used the case to push his agenda.
It's just so sad. I can't imagine what Molly's family was going through during all of this. It's like their grief was being exploited.
It was. And to their credit, they spoke out against it, pleaded with politicians and the media to just let them grieve, not to use Molly's death for their own game.
That's a really powerful thing to do in the face of all that pressure.
It is. They wanted to focus on honoring Molly's memory, on getting justice for her, not getting caught up in all the political noise.
Right, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who truly lost someone. So, with all this going on, what happened with the actual trial?
Well, the trial itself was actually delayed because of COVID.
Oh yeah, the pandemic really threw everything off.
For sure. So it wasn't until almost 3 years after Rivera's arrest that he finally went to trial.
Wow, 3 years. That's a long time to wait for justice.
It is. And during the trial, the defense tried to create doubt about Rivera's guilt.
I'm guessing they pointed fingers at other people.
They did. They even tried to bring up Molly's boyfriend, Dalton, again, question his behavior during the investigation, tried to make him look suspicious.
That's awful. It's like they were putting him on trial, too.
It was really tough on Dalton and Molly's family. And to make matters worse, Rivera decided to testify himself.
Oh, really? What did he say?
He came up with this crazy story about how masked men had forced him to get rid of Molly's body.
Sounds like a desperate attempt to shift the blame. Did anyone believe him?
The jury didn't. After 2 days of deliberation, they found Rivera guilty of first-degree murder.
And he was sentenced to life in prison.
Life without parole. Justice was served, but it obviously didn't bring Molly back. This whole case just left a heavy feeling on everyone.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About how complicated the justice system is, how there are so many factors at play.
Absolutely. There's the legal side of it, the media circus, the political debates, and then there's the human cost, a family trying to cope with this horrible loss.
It's important to remember that, right? That these cases aren't just abstract legal battles. There are real people at the heart of it all.
Absolutely. And while this case made national news, it's important to remember that it was ultimately about Molly Tibbitz, a young woman who was loved and is missed by her family and community.
And her story, even though it's so tragic, it reminds us about the importance of human connection, about the strength of community. And it also shows how technology can be this double-edged sword, right? I mean, Molly's Fitbit helped solve the case, but it also makes you think about how much data we're all generating all the time.
It's true. It's almost like a constant digital footprint. And in this case, it was used for good, but it definitely raises questions about privacy and surveillance.
It's something we should all be thinking about, especially as technology keeps advancing.
Absolutely. And this case also highlights how, even with all the high-tech tools available, sometimes it's the simplest things that make the biggest difference. Like, remember how the sheriff used colored pencils and a map to track the car's movements?
It's a good reminder that technology is a tool, and it's up to us how we use it.
Right. And in this case, it was used to bring a killer to justice. But it also sparked all these important conversations about immigration and justice, about how we balance individual rights with the need for security.
It's a lot to unpack, and I think it's important for us to keep having these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
I agree. And I think one of the most important takeaways from this case is the power of Molly's family's decision to focus on honoring her memory, to not let her death be overshadowed by the political debates.
Their strength and resilience are truly inspiring.
Absolutely. They chose to create something positive out of this tragedy, establishing a scholarship fund in her name to help other young people.
It's a beautiful way to keep her spirit alive.
It really is. And, for everyone listening out there, this case, even though it happened a few years ago, it brings up some really tough questions that are still relevant today. Like, how do we balance individual rights with the pursuit of justice?
Exactly. It makes you think about your own beliefs, your own assumptions about crime and punishment, immigration, community, even the role of technology in our lives.
Right. And at the end of the day, we can't forget that these cases, they involve real people, real lives that are forever changed.
Molly Tibbitz was more than just a name in the news. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone who was loved and is deeply missed.
Yeah. And her story, it reminds us of some really important things, like the importance of connecting with each other, of community. And I think ultimately it's a story about hope.
It is. It also shows how complicated law enforcement can be. I mean, there's so many challenges, so many gray areas.
Think about Pamela, that rookie officer. Her mistake could have thrown the whole case out.
It really highlights how important training and experience are, especially in those high-pressure situations.
And it makes you think about how we can better support those who are new to law enforcement, make sure they have the guidance they need.
Because even seasoned professionals can make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes can be learning opportunities.
Exactly. And speaking of learning, this case also shows how much forensic technology has advanced.
It's incredible, right? Molly's Fitbit data was key, but now there's DNA analysis, facial recognition, cell phone tracking, all these tools that can help investigators piece together what happened.
And it's only going to get more advanced. Who knows what kinds of tools they'll have in the future?
It's exciting, but also a little bit scary, It makes you think about privacy and how much information is out there.
For sure. But at the end of the day, technology is just a tool. It's how we use it that matters.
Right. And in this case, it was used to bring a killer to justice. But it also sparked these really important conversations about bigger issues, like immigration and the justice system.
Those are conversations we need to keep having, even if they're difficult.
I agree. And I think one of the most powerful things about this case is how Molly's family chose to handle it. They could have easily gotten caught up in all the political drama, but they didn't. They focused on honoring her memory.
And they turned their grief into something positive by creating that scholarship fund.
It's a beautiful way to keep her spirit alive and to help others.
It really is. And as we wrap up our deep dive into this case, I'm just left feeling grateful. Grateful for the hard work of the investigators, for the strength of Molly's family and community, and for the fact that justice was served.
I agree. It's a reminder that even in the face of something so terrible, there's still hope. Hope for healing, hope for justice, and hope for a better future. And for anyone listening who wants to learn more about Molly's legacy and the scholarship fund, we'll have some links in the show notes.
It's a great way to take action and make a difference.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll conclude our deep dive into the tragic case of Molly Tibbitz. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, but until then, stay curious, keep learning, and remember, even in the darkest of times, there's always hope to be found.